Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's HDI webcast, DevOps plus KM, using knowledge to increase speed and reduce pain. Today's webinar is brought to you by DevOps Fusion, where DevOps and service management unite, and more about that in a few minutes. I'll be your moderator today. My name is Roy Atkinson, and many of you know me from HDI. We have just a few announcements before we begin, just some logistics to help you get the most out of the webcast today. If you experience any difficulty with the webinar itself, you can get help by clicking on the green question mark at the bottom of your screen. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the webcast. Click on the red QA button and just type your question into the Ask a Question text area below the video window, and then click Submit. At this time, we recommend that you disable any pop-up blockers so that you do get all the windows that we're going to send your way. To chat with others who are attending today, click on the group chat button at the bottom right of your screen. We love having you exchange ideas during the webinar. And if you look at the toolbar on the slide that's in front of you right now, you see Ask the Speakers a Question for QA, and right next to that is a green button with a folder icon, and that's where you can get resources from today's webinar. Slides will advance automatically throughout the event, and you may download a copy of the slides by clicking on the Download Slide button located below the presentation window. If you're experiencing any technical problems, please visit the Help Guide by clicking on the Help link below the media player. In addition, you can contact our technical support helpline, which is also located in the webcast Help Guide. Remember that today's webinar will be available on demand after about 24 hours, and you will receive an email reminder to let you know that it is available. Okay, so you will have the webinar available to revisit on demand. You can connect with HDI on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on HDIConnect.com, where you can read a blog, ask a question, or find a solution. And there will be tweeting today from the event, so please use the ThinkHDI hashtag if you're sending tweets out. With us today to tell us more about DevOps Fusion is Cinda Daly, the CEO of Focus Events and facilitator for DevOps Fusion. Cinda is no stranger to HDI audiences, since she was previously the moderator of these webcasts and director of content for HDI. Nice to have you back with us today. Cinda, over to you.
Thank you so much, and I'm really happy to be here. I was actually honored to be asked to chair the program and facilitate this new offering at Fusion this year, and I'm really excited to talk about it briefly today. You might wonder why ITSMF and HDI added this program, aside from the fact, obviously, that the DevOps movement has momentum, a history actually, and some long legs into the future of product development, deployment, and service lifecycle management. So it's a strategic opportunity for the leaders in both communities, ITSMF and HDI. Now, there's so many ways to illustrate the dynamics of DevOps and the service lifecycle, but this particular graphic represents the opportunity specifically for IT service management leaders who, as I see it, sit at the fulcrum between development on one side and customers on the other side across the entire service lifecycle. And as the center point, IT service management leaders, I think, have a distinct benefit of seeing both sides of that effort and can directly influence either side so that all the critical factors are working together and stay in balance. So on one hand, it's an opportunity to become an integral part of the development process and the leader for the effective deployment and release management and the key proponent for customer success. So all three of those major points in the life cycle are strategic opportunities to get invited to that party as an ITSM leader. You could also apply the concepts of DevOps to the service management life cycle itself. So this event is a natural home for this summit. So if you attend the summit, you'll come away with fundamentals you need to explore both of these opportunities and take the next steps forward. And I'd like to take just a minute to share a couple little things about the program. First, it's not just a pre-conference workshop. It's really an immersive experience in DevOps. We have 17, really fantastic speakers that are lined up, and you can see the spectrum that they cover. In fact, your presenter today, Adam Krob, is one of those fine folks. So I'm really impressed with the lineup we have. On Sunday, which is day one, we'll introduce a variety of perspectives and set the stage for collaboration. Then we're going to do some deep dives into the key processes and wrap up the day establishing the way forward. But in between, we're going to have roundtable discussions, open Q&A, town halls. It's going to be really fast-paced and interactive and a lot of diverse perspectives, which I'm looking forward to. Then Monday runs concurrently with the Fusion Conference. So it will be the case study day. We're going to get in-depth looks at 3 different DevOps journeys from these companies that you see on the screen, Intel, Microsoft, and the J. Paul Getty Fund. And you also get to attend the general session. So it's a wonderful 2-day experience. The detailed agenda is in the resources folder. I'll stick around until after Adam's presentation if you have any specific questions about it, but I really hope to see you in New Orleans, and enjoy the webcast today with Adam. Thanks. Back to you, Roy.
Thanks very much, Cinda. I'm looking forward to being a part of the DevOps Fusion Summit, and it should be some great information. And thanks for pointing out some of the cool features.
Yep. Thanks for having me.
As always, we have a quick poll for you today, just about knowledge-centered support. So if you could take a moment and answer the question: is your organization currently using knowledge-centered support? KCS. Either 1, we do formal knowledge management but don't use KCS. 2, we do use KCS. 3, we're planning to use KCS. 4, what is KCS? And 5, we have no formal knowledge management in place and no plans for it. So what's the situation with KCS and perhaps knowledge management in general in your organization? We'll give you another couple of seconds to answer that question, and then we'll take a peek at the results. All right. So let's take a peek at the result. Very interesting results. I'm going to let you see the results. And there we are. About 26% of you are using formal knowledge management but not KCS. About 19% are using KCS. 32% are planning to use KCS. 8.2% don't know what KCS is. And we have no formal knowledge management in place and no plans for it at this point, just about 13.5%. That's not a good thing. You should definitely figure out what you're going to do about knowledge management. It can really help you out. And glad to see that so many of you are either using KCS or planning to use KCS. As you know, HDI is very much involved with the KCS community, and we'd love to see you use that methodology. It's very advantageous, we think. So there you go. If you want to know more about KCS, come to the HDI website. You can type in thinkhdi.com/KM, like knowledge management, and it will take you to our knowledge management page. At this point, I would like to introduce our featured speaker, Adam Krob. For more than 2 decades, Adam has studied and evaluated IT and customer support structures. While his career spans numerous areas, his core focus has always been the optimal alignment of support with the company's goals and the use of knowledge management strategies such as KCS as a tool to achieve these goals. Adam is a pioneer in enhancing overall perceptions of service and in the transformation of support from a reactive to a proactive enterprise. He is co-founder of Clever, a company dedicated to bringing common sense to knowledge-sharing practices. He received his MA and PhD in political science from Duke University and his MBA from Tulane University's Freeman School of Business. And he lives with his wife and daughter in New Orleans, which happens to be where our conference is going to be. Fusion and the DevOps Summit are both going to be in New Orleans. So, Adam, you won't be far from home. Thanks very much for doing this for us today, Adam, and take it away.
All right. Thanks, Roy. And let me just advance the slides up to the beginning. of the talk, and we'll get started. So this is DevOps plus knowledge management. It's using knowledge to increase speed and reduce pain. Let me talk to you quickly through the agenda, and then we'll get into the meat of it. So what I want to do is I want to talk about 3 specific areas. First is to give those of you who may not know what DevOps is a little bit of background. Those of you who have heard of it before, maybe it'll be a little bit of a different take than what you've heard before, and then talk about how that's going to impact support, particularly from the knowledge perspective. What we'll find when I talk about it in detail is that we're going to be talking a lot about those critical moments where, you know, as Cinda talked about earlier, sort of support is the connect point between the development teams, between the teams that roll out what development creates, and the customers themselves or the end users. So we're going to talk a little bit about the implications for support and how we can, look at those challenges. Then what I'd like to do is give you an insider's perspective. I've had an opportunity to see this perspective as someone who's both run support organizations but also run development organizations. So I wanted to give you that perspective as well. And let me tell you a little bit why. I'm a firm believer that real change requires 3 different things. First, you have to have the motivation to change. Second, you have to have the ability to change. And third, you have to know when you're got to make that change. So a big part of the motivation is understanding the perspective of the teams that you're going to be interacting with. So what I'm going to try to do is give you an insider's view of what the development team, what the teams that maybe the systems administration team that's really adopted this DevOps approach, what they're thinking. So we're going to give you that insight, so that'll help you as you work through getting more involved in that process, so you can appeal to them in a way that'll motivate them to work with you. And then I'm going to talk about 3 specific practical ways that you can engage to improve the customer experience, but also improve your lives as well as the lives of the development teams that you're going to be working with. So we're going to start with a little bit of theory. We're going to talk a little bit about the implications on how does that hit support operations particularly, and then we're going to talk, about what specifically we can do to address that, both from insider's perspective but also from outside. So what I want to do is start with a brief description of what DevOps is. I'm going to read it, but you can go back to this later. It's from a really nice website. I have the website here. You can click onto it really easily. But it's this emerging trend with the collision of 2 major trends by themselves. The first is this agile operations or agile systems administration. It's this lean approach to operations work, but also to development. It's a whole different set of discussions and different set of vocabulary. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. You'll hear different terms, but it's a very different approach, in particular to the development lifecycle. For those of you who've heard Agile and are familiar with it in the development world, it really is about going from an approach where we create large releases that we release at a particular period of time, sort of big bang events, to really smaller releases where we focus on a particular set of functions that our customers want, and we build those functions in these really short 2-week development life cycles called sprints. And so, it's a really lean sort of approach to development where we don't have a lot of the overhead, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. And we're going to see the implications of that for the support and the ITSM organizations in just a moment. And the second part of this, and this is the part that I really think is the most important, is the second is a much expanded understanding of the value of collaboration between development and operations staff through all the stages of the development lifecycle when creating an operation, operating a service, and how important operations has become in our increasingly service-oriented world. I added the emphasis, but this whole notion of the value of collaboration. So we're going to talk from the inside out about what DevOps looks like from a development organization's perspective and why they love it. And then we're going to talk about, from the outside, what does that mean for us in organizations that are receiving that, and they're taking that and then delivering a service to the customer. So what does that feel like? And we'll work through that. So when we think about it and take a step back from the organization's perspective, what is DevOps trying to do? First, it's trying to streamline and speed up the development process itself. A lot of development processes started and were modeled on processes that required a great deal of fault tolerance. So, a lot of times we drew on experiences from some of the first software development, which came out of the Defense Department, came out of NASA. And all of those development approaches were, creating software that had to be precise, that had to be fault tolerant, where we couldn't have a lot of errors and a lot of problems. So we ended up creating a lot of overhead for that development process because we had to have it be so precise. For most organizations, we don't have to hold ourselves to that kind of standard, and it actually hinders us from effectively developing software and delivering it. But the second part about the way that DevOps delivers value is really trying to enhance the effectiveness of transfer of knowledge into and out of the development process. So, when we think about DevOps, there are sort of these two components. Lots of people focus on that first one, sort of that internal, agile approach to development, the agile approach to the process itself, but it's not just the process itself that we're trying to enhance. It's also the effectiveness of the information that's going in and producing something valuable to the customer. So both of those are really critical. So, what I always try to bring back myself is, so what does that mean to the support organization? So the first thing is kind of troubling, which is, when you think about where DevOps came from, where agile processes came from, they came from this experience that I just talked about really heavily engineered development processes with lots of documentation and release notes and technical documents and guides and lots of things that get produced, tangible objects. And lots of us in support organizations are used to having access to those kinds of documents. What's challenging and interesting is that DevOps recommends that we create just enough documentation. So what just enough means becomes the core sticking point for support. What does that mean? And what that means in a lot of organizations, and what I've seen in my own consulting practice, is that oftentimes that means as little as possible. So I worked with a company that they had been producing these really great documents, and then about 2 years ago they started moving more towards an agile development process and really stopped creating the documents that the support organization was used to and relied on as part of the support process. So we get into the situation where, the left to their own devices, and understandably so, the development teams are going to produce as little as possible. They're going to produce as little documentation as they're required to, because it really does take them out of the mode of delivering for that next 2-week sprint. So, that means for support and for a service desk that we're likely to see two different things. We're likely to see that the volume of documentation is going to go down, and we're likely to see that the format of that documentation is going to change. And a lot of that means, a lot of that's going to be in different formats that we're not used to, not, formal release notes, formal guides, specifications, documents. There'll be things like user story documents, because agile development really is founded on creating atomic stories that we can then take through the development process, build out, and then move to the next one. We might get release notes, but we'll also get user acceptance documents, because in this approach, it means that the customer often is involved a lot earlier, because we're creating a user story from their perspective. And from a knowledge perspective, I think that's tremendous. I'm a big advocate of KCS. I've done KCS training for a number of years, and one of the core concepts there is that we should be creating knowledge in the voice of the person who's going to be consuming it. That's a real value of creating documents using KCS, is that we're writing it for the person who's going to be using it. It makes it findable, it makes it searchable, it makes it easy to reuse. Well, that also is really tremendous from the perspective of developing documents from an agile perspective. That's really great. So we actually know what the intention of this software was, and sort of getting a good bit of context about that software from that user story. So getting access to that is actually really valuable and probably a little bit easier to consume than a specifications document that had certain sections and you had to know the specification document to really understand it. But the challenge is going to be that the volume of documentation that we have access to will likely go down. So when we think about this from the perspective of the service desk of an ITSM organization, we're going to see fewer resources than the ones that we had been accustomed to having access to. And that in of itself is, I think, a major challenge for the service desk. Because left to their own devices, the development teams are going to be rational. They're going to say, we need less documentation. We came from a heavy documentation perspective. We really need to cut that down. How do we do that? Okay, great. We'll just cut it down. And then support, you're looking for that same information that you've used before to troubleshoot a problem, and it's not there. Or it's there in a very different format. And so you're adding time and adding challenges, and we'll talk about what those challenges really are, looking for that documentation, looking for that kernel of information that you needed to support a new piece of software, a new service, and really anything new coming out of the development team. So this is an interesting challenge. It's that, one of the reasons why we're anticipating some challenges is that, DevOps is really designed from the perspective of the development organization. So, agile software development is really designed to help the organization flow better. It's designed to make the development process move faster. But it's challenged when it interacts with other areas. So that second component of DevOps, we have the component of DevOps at the top, which is really about, this agile approach, this lean approach to developing solutions and tools and software. And the second part is how do we interact then in and out of the organization? I have an 11-year-old daughter, and my 11-year-old daughter loves Taylor Swift. And so I listen to it a lot in the car, and I find that a lot of her lyrics apply to other portions of my life. And in her song Red, she says that, and this is in relationship to one of her boyfriends. And by the way, if you don't want to be published in a song, don't be Taylor Swift's boyfriend. So DevOps is kind of like what she said. It's like driving a new Maserati down a dead-end street. It's a very vivid image. So, in relationship to the Taylor Swift song, it's all about the boy that she was dating and how exciting it was. From the development organization's perspective, it feels like all of this work that they had done that seemed really slow and cumbersome has now speeded up extraordinarily. But once we get to the point where we're handing off information from our scrums, from our sprints back into a support organization, it feels like we're hitting a wall. But the thing is, from all of our perspectives, we've been there, because oftentimes speeding up a process doesn't make it better. Let me tell you a short story about it in a situation where I found this to be absolutely the case. I was working at a university, and I was running the internal user support team, and we were going to be supporting the new system for requisitioning new positions. So, you get a rec for a new position, you have to go through all of these steps. One of the limiting factors, and one of the things that was the most frustrating, is it took a great deal of time to get the paperwork from one person to the next person. And that felt like that was a real limiting factor for us to get a quick response when we needed to replace a person who had left, or we got a new requisition and we're really ready to fill it. So it became a real interesting challenge. So what we did is we bought this really nice online system that had a great workflow, and we had electronic signatures built in. And so we took that half a day out of every step where we had to move it along physically across campus, and we took that physical movement of the paperwork away. But what we found is that there was one person in the HR department who had to look at, research, and approve every single one of these requisitions. And what we ended up with is we ended up hitting that bottleneck just that much faster. So we had all the information that she needed to her that quickly, but she could only process the same number of requisitions that she could process. Getting it to her faster didn't help anybody. And that's kind of what DevOps feels like right now from the developer's perspective. We've really ramped up. We've gotten a lot faster, but we're seeing challenges. And again, the reason I'm talking about this is so that you can understand what their perspective is and then help them understand how we can overcome that together with a partnership between the service delivery teams and the development teams. So there are really two different challenges that the development that the teams in Agile who are doing the development see sort of from the inside out. So I'm going to talk about the first one really exclusively. There's another one here that's interesting, and if you're interested in, I'm happy to talk about it in the Q&A, or obviously you can email me and we can talk about it the other direction as well. So happy to do that. But there's, knowledge moves kind of like a stream. So we have knowledge inputs coming into development processes. We have knowledge outputs moving out. And so what I'm most concerned about with this group is the knowledge outputs moving out from the development process. So the challenge is, from your perspective and my perspective as someone who is a support person, is the service desk doesn't get what we need. And so what do? We go back and we say, look, I didn't get what I needed. So I'm going to go back to the development team again and again and again until I get it. And so what does that do from the perspective of the development team? I don't have the time to work on that next 2-week sprint because I'm taking time to support something that I've already handed off. I don't really want to do that anymore. From our perspective inside the ITSM organization, we're frustrated because we're constantly going back over and over and over again. That adds time to things like our mean time to resolution. It adds to our backlog, and it frustrates all of us. So from both perspectives, this is a really frustrating problem. So it's that handoff, it's that second part of DevOps that's the real challenge. Because we're running our sports car inside the development practices. We're getting things done faster, but our challenge is that our handoffs are not working well, and we're not able to go on to the next thing and really take advantage of that speed. And sort of fundamentally thinking about that you've got a ramp. It's a certain distance. We go that distance fast. Well, that doesn't really help us all that much in terms of addressing the backlog. Upstream, when we talk about the knowledge coming into the development organization, there are challenges there too, where the line of business IT teams or solution engineers, in those of you who do external support, they're often defining requirements that are totally new, or if you've ever worked in the development organization, not even possible given the financial and time constraints. So, what we get is we end up rebuilding a lot of things. And, when we start thinking about this from the knowledge perspective, if we could start thinking about how we can standardize that, we could take care of some of these big challenges. So, but for today, it's really about that downstream problem. How do we bridge that gap? How do we build knowledge sharing practices into this handoff so that we effectively bridge out of a development organization that's providing us really what we're not used to. It's providing us a level of detail that we're not accustomed to, that we like to get more detail about. And how do we talk to them and how do we convince them? And I think that's sort of the key is, what can we do not only to get what we need, but also convince them that it's in everybody's best interest to do that. Because once again, how do you get people to change? They have to have the motivation, they have to have the ability, and they have to know sort of what implications and when they should change. And if we're explicit about all three of those things organizationally, then we're likely to get change. If any one of those isn't missing, if we don't have the ability, like we don't have a really great tool, for those of you who aren't doing knowledge management right now, this is an important part of it. You should be thinking about, programmatically how you can move, you leverage knowledge management to move knowledge not only inside your ITSM organization, but also from the outside. That's super important as well. So I want to talk about 3 very specific steps, and I'm a big believer in each one of these steps. And each one of these are drawn from the approaches that I've used in knowledge-centered support within a support organization, but build on those as well. So the first we're going to talk about is when to get involved. When is it that ITSM organizations, that service desk folks can get involved in this process to better receive the knowledge that the development team is producing? How do we do that? And the second is really important. It's really around structuring that knowledge. And I think that people underplay the importance of structure. Oftentimes, I see this a lot with organizations who implement a knowledge tool. They accept the structure out of the box from the tool, how the knowledge is set up. This is an area where you need to be very careful and very thoughtful, because if you can, within a couple of seconds, determine if that knowledge applies and if it's useful for this customer, then having 100 knowledge articles is great. If it takes you 2 or 3 minutes to determine, because it's played out in a strange way or it's written in these giant paragraphs that are hard to consume, it's going to be very hard for you to determine if one of those 100 articles actually applies or is useful for you. The third is really critical, and this is something that most of the time we do not do well. I'll give you a great example of someone who has done it well when we talk about it, is measuring that improvement, measuring that handoff. How do we do that effectively? That's really important, because of all things, one of the greatest motivators in organizations is, am I making that KPI? Am I making that metric? And who's watching it? Is my boss watching it? Is my boss's boss watching it? If they are, then I'm going to care about it. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that approach. I have a very specific metric that I've just developed for this particular handoff approach. So the first thing to do is think about when it would be advantageous to get involved in the development process. So while user stories are being crafted from the beginning, it would be really great to be able to see that and understand what's in the pipeline coming soon, what functions are being developed, what services are being offered, and what is that going to look like. Those user stories, what we used to call requirements documents, giant, massive things that were really difficult to consume, they provide critical context for support. Because oftentimes we get support contacts, whether it's a case, whether it's a call, whether it's a chat, where somebody says, it isn't doing this, it's supposed to do this. And if we look back at the context, we determine, well, no, actually that's not what it's supposed to do. This is what it's defined as being able to do. So sometimes our challenges aren't really even about, whether it's working or not, but is it working as designed? Is it working as coded? If it is, then that's an opportunity to talk about maybe that's an enhancement down the road. And for those of you who work in external support, maybe that's an opportunity to upsell to another product and get them to an account manager who could help them go to an upsell, which is, again, a great opportunity for support to show the value that we're delivering. It's also the case that QA or acceptance testing often involves the end users as well. And this is where I think it's really great to know that the ITSM organization should be involved in that process as well. I have worked with organizations who do this. They have somebody who is doing acceptance testing who is basically part of the support organization, but their primary role is in QA or acceptance testing. So they're providing the support perspective into that process and helping document what comes out of that process. And it's really important too, is uncovering the processes, the problems that won't be resolved before release, because all of us know that we are not going to we're not going to be able to uncover all of the problems before we're not going to be able to address all the problems before release. We'll be able to uncover a lot more than we can address. And so knowing about those ahead of time is really tremendous. And in a format that's helpful to us, and that's also really important as well. Because, the kinds of knowledge that we need and the kinds of knowledge that we're going to consume is going to be structured a lot differently than those old knowledge forms, the kinds that we saw that we were used to before, where we had requirements documents that, a lot of those were written by lawyers, to be honest with you. They were written by someone who was trying to say, this is exactly what we need to contractually create this. And, those were developed oftentimes in external development organizations and made their way into the development organizations that also did applications and solutions internally for IT organizations as well. And so why not replace those with the simple knowledge articles that go directly into that support knowledge base? So during that QA, during that acceptance testing, it's great that they're putting in a bug report. But not only would I like that bug report and maybe a list of the bugs, I would love to have pre-created, pre-formatted knowledge articles created in the way that I'm used to consuming them in my knowledge base already. Because honestly, how often are we looking at the manuals anyway? We're really not, and our customers are really not. So what if we could restructure that knowledge that we need in a way that we can consume it? And it kind of gets to a sort of a critical mind shift that was really important to this, which was, we need to start looking and measuring the amount of time that we're spending going through a loop. How do we measure that improvement? How do we measure improvement in that handoff process between a development organization and our organization? One support organization I worked with, the chief customer officer, this is an external support organization, but it works equally well with an internal organization, really talked about that they had to understand all of the different legs on the stool, and they're all supporting that customer's experience. And so we need to be able to understand how we can bridge between those two different areas and do it effectively. We need a measure that will hold us all accountable for the effectiveness of the knowledge that we're handing off. In one large IT organization, we came up with this really great concept, which sort of is the foundation of this measurement. And this key concept kind of goes like this, that knowledge is not just a component of a project plan, that it's not just a checkbox that you're handing off support documentation, support knowledge from the development process to the support team, to the ITSM team. it needs to be accepted. So as a part of that, we flipped, as a part of our broader knowledge program in this large IT organization, we flipped the concept and we said, rather than handing off knowledge, someone is accepting knowledge. And that formed the foundation of this measurement, which I call the looper. And the looper is, we need to see how many times knowledge coming out of the development process is loops back through from the ITSM, from the support organization, back to get clarified. And it's kind of like, for those of you who are really into ITIL, it's kind of like change management. When we get emergency change requests over and over and over again on the same code base, we start looking at the code base and saying, what's the problem here? It gives us a flag. It gives us an indication, an area to focus on. And so the same thing is true here. If we can start measuring how many times we have to loop, we can start demonstrating that this is both a problem for all of us, both in the development organization and in the support organization, and that we can create programmatically approaches where we change when we get involved, where we change how we format that knowledge, so that we reduce the number of loops. So, it becomes this really great central feature of the second part of DevOps, because the second part of DevOps is fundamentally creating an opportunity to share better what's coming out of the development organization and into our support organization. What's tremendous is that the development teams who have adopted Agile are excited about it. They're driving the Maserati. Things move faster. If you talk to people who have transitioned from a traditional development approach to an Agile development approach, they're excited. So we can harness some of that excitement to start talking about ways that we can work together to reduce the pain for both of us and more effectively share. Because I really believe that that's the core of making DevOps effective. The core is not just getting that internal process right, not just being lean in one part of our organization, but understanding from that perspective, from the inside of the development team, how can we more effectively hand off that knowledge so we're not spending our time doing the work that, honestly, with a little bit of tweaking, with a little bit of work, with some consistent attention, we can improve substantially. And I think understanding, mapping a number, I'm a big proponent of the metric like the looper, because it does go back to so many different things. It measures our performance against against an objective set of criteria that's almost impossible to game. We can't really game it at all, and it drives directly back to our efficiency, our customer experience, all of those things that become really important to sustaining and building the partnership between organizations so that it works that much more effectively, so that we can remove that wall, so that we don't spend all of our time going back and looping again and again, that we get a lot more runway, that we can drive a lot faster, and that we can harness the excitement of the development team. What I'd like to do now is take some questions, but before I do, I wanted to give you my email address, my LinkedIn contact information, my Twitter account. All of those I think are really important, because I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to understand and like to talk to you. I also wanted to chime in with Cinda and say that the DevOps event at Fusion is going to be very exciting. It's packed with knowledge just like this, where not only do we try to be, understanding the theory, but really applying it to your experience and how to make that experience that much more effective. So what I'll do now is I'm going to hand it back to Roy, and we can talk and have some questions for the next few minutes.
Hey, great. Thanks, Adam. Thanks for all that information. And we do have some questions for you. First, we're going to send out a link for you. Please take a couple of minutes and fill out the evaluation for today's webinar. It will be really helpful for us to get the feedback from you. And you should have a pop-up. If you didn't, please disable your pop-up blocker and accept the pop-up so you can fill out the evaluation. And it's handy to do it now before you leave the environment, and that way it gets done. And I'll just move on to the questions we have for Adam. And we've got some good ones here for you, Adam, I think.
Great.
And I think you answered this at least in part, but maybe you can specifically address it since our audience is primarily people from support organizations. Can the support team, being in touch with customers, help bring knowledge to the development team, and what kinds of knowledge?
Oh, I think it's absolutely a great opportunity to bring knowledge from the customer's experience with the solutions. One of the things that I've worked with a company that really focused on a very small part of a development product of a product that they developed. It was a support team that was working on a very small application. But what they did is the support team came back to the development team with the kinds of areas and the kinds of challenges that all of the end users were having. And those challenges could be solved in two different ways, one of which was sort of functional challenges. What are the functional challenges that are happening over and over and over again that the development team can correct? And I can tell you, knowledge articles are a great source of that kind of intelligence. I love case systems, but case systems really record the history of our interaction with a customer, where knowledge articles get to that core of what the challenge was. If we know the trends and the challenges that we're seeing on a week-to-week basis, we can start reporting back and saying, these are the kinds of challenges that we're having inside the application. For me, it was always authentication, download, install. Those kinds of things often are the sort of the bugbears of most organizations, most software as well. But then the other side is, this same organization focused on what knowledge could we deliver to our customers within the development environment, within the application, and how can we put that back into the application and display it before they came to the support organization? How can we integrate that even more closely into the application? So I think those two different areas, both functionality as well as knowledge that you're gaining, that would be great to get to the customers inside that application, inside that solution, would be tremendous.
Thanks very much for that answer. That's helpful. This is a rather elaborate one, so I'll ask it now while we have a little bit of time left. Can you walk through an imaginary DevOps project to show how and where the knowledge elements fit in? So something really simple that we could buzz through here just to show how information gets exchanged back and forth.
Okay, so we can do a before and after.
Right.
So oftentimes in the DevOps project, it really all starts with the user story. So we're developing a particular component, or we always take what's a giant development product and we break it down into bite-sized pieces, and that's the whole lean concept. That we're not trying to develop a giant release of something. What we're developing is we're developing small components of that release, and we're creating that on a really short, small basis, and then releasing that every couple of weeks. Some people are actually doing it, every couple of days, and so that's pretty exciting. So we're taking the idea of what used to be a specification, and we're creating small components that fulfill a part of that user story, and then in that user story, we go through, we code it, we do some regression testing, and then we do an acceptance test. So, I mean, there's lots of stuff inside there, but I don't want to take a long time with the inside there. But what's important is that at the end we have acceptance, and then we have, in some organizations, some knowledge that's then created and handed off. So, what's most interesting to me from the support perspective isn't necessarily the box in the middle, where the actual the sprint, or sometimes they call it Scrum, from a user story to a developed tool. Because most of the time, at least my first tier isn't going to be looking inside the code. They're going to be looking at the functionality and what was it supposed to do, and what did it actually do. So when you think about how could we package this in a nice way, it would be really great to see that upfront information. So how did we define what this was supposed to do? And then at the end, did it do what it was supposed to do, and what are the outliers? Because that sort of fundamentally gets to what we care about in support. What is this supposed to do, so that we know whether it's an error or whether it's just a limitation in a function. And then what are the things that we know that are not performing the way that we thought that they would perform and are being addressed currently by the development organization.
Great, thank you. This is be a little bit more brief, and it's a distinction that I make as well. And a lot of times when I talk about knowledge management, you made a distinction between findable and searchable, which I think some people get and some people don't. Could you just explain what you mean by each one of those terms?
Yes. So, improving findability, it's one of those funny things is that, I've seen gigantic knowledge repositories that are as good as empty knowledge repositories, because the people who are looking for the knowledge can't find it because it's not either structured in a way that's easy to consume. So, for example, when I first started in knowledge management about 20 years ago, we used to write these beautiful documents with hundreds of screenshots, but it would take you 5 to 10 minutes to read through any given one. And most of the time, people who didn't know that was precisely what they needed, they would not pay attention to it whatsoever. And the second thing is, oftentimes, we would, at the same time, back when I first started and made that mistake over time as well, we would write it from the perspective of the people who are writing it. We're writing it as a support person. But the person we really wanted to consume it and who will be asking the questions is the end customer or the end user. And so we need to write using their terms and using their language, because that promotes findability. That promotes our ability to not to search, not to index it, whether it indexes this field or this field, that's important. But what's truly important is it written in a way that a person looking for that knowledge, and ideally the end customer or end user, would be able to easily identify and be able to find it based on the words and the phrases that they would use.
All right, thank you. Some great questions. Where would you suggest starting to learn about DevOps and knowledge?
Well, it's really new, so I think we're really starting to build that. What I love to do is I take approaches and I take ideas from different places. Like, knowledge-centered support doesn't really necessarily cover how the handoff works between development organizations and support organizations. But understanding the principles of knowledge-centered support will help you get some ideas about how to incorporate that handoff. I think it's really, I think that part is really important. There are lots of people who are starting to write about this. There's a lot of interest in it, I can tell you that one of the best places to do is to come to the DevOps forum at Fusion, because those are the folks who are starting to talk about it. There aren't a lot of us, but look at the knowledge practices that are being used, particularly in support, and then work to understand what the perspective of the development organization is. Because they're talking a lot about what their challenges are, sort of at either end of their agile process, but they're not necessarily drawing on some of the same some tools and approaches that we are. But I think that, from my perspective, what's the most valuable is understanding where the development team is coming from, and then adapting that and using that as a starting point to have a conversation with them. Is if you're getting their perspective and you're sharing your perspective and saying, and by the way, look, we can use an approach that we're already using effectively, that would be really tremendous. It's a great starting point to a conversation. It's not to say that everybody's going to jump up and down and say, yeah, that'll be great, we're going to do that. Mm-hmm. But it's a great starting point for the conversation.
Great, thank you. This is a good one. I think this is probably going to wind up being our last question. We're getting real short on time here. We find that we make the most of our own documentation as we find that what we learn more about a released product after it's launched than we do in the time up to it. As a service desk, what's the best way to change that? I can relate to that, by the way. You find more about the release after it's out there than you did beforehand. And do you have a suggestion for how to change that process to make it better?
So organizations don't work with guilt, they work with shame. So you need a shame culture to show people how much time and effort we're spending on both sides of the equation, and we have to have a measure of that. Number one thing that we don't have today with most of our interactions with our development teams is a real measure of how effective that handoff is coming our direction. Most of us have good measures the other way. Most of us in the development organization is really great about beating us up about this, saying this is how many times you escalated a bug to us that wasn't really a bug. We get that a lot. But what we don't have is we don't have a measure the other direction. And I am a huge believer on getting that out there and publishing it. Yep. This is how many times we have to go back and ask you for clarification.
And that's the loop you talked about earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a very interesting way to look at it. Look at the acceptance just as you would from acceptance of a release or something like that. It's great. Okay, we just have just about a minute left. We'll see if we can squeeze one more question in here really quick. From your point of view, are there any distinct advantages of a DevOps culture for the support center? So maybe you could just take 2 or 3 things to sum up, because I think you talked about that quite a bit during the webinar. So advantage for the support center.
One of the advantages for the support center is that I think that now more than ever, the development team is open and excited and engaged and willing to talk. They've just done something that's made their lives a lot better. And, when we talk about change requiring motivation, that to me is really important. So you take that opportunity for people to talk. I think it's really super important. The other advantage is that because the development cycle times are so much shorter, I can tell you that you are likely to be able to get in on some sprints to get some things taken care of after a release potentially, because you're not asking for a huge commitment. The development team's used to doing small, focused projects that really deliver value to the organization. I think it's tremendous. And the last piece is this whole notion of user stories rather than specifications documents gets developers thinking like we do, thinking from the perspective of the customer, the person who's going to consume the services. So I think that's really important as well.
Great. Thanks, Adam. And I'm just going to close out by mentioning next month's webinar, September 15th, is the HCI Buyer's Guide Live, and the focus is on enterprise service management, and I will be your moderator for that. And then I'm just going to share with you the URL for the DevOps Fusion. So get on down there to New Orleans and take part in this great piece of service management and DevOps working together. Okay, happy to have hosted you today, and we'll be back next month in September. On behalf of the sponsor, DevOps Fusion, and our guest speaker, Adam Krob, thanks for your time and have a great day.